Well, we're going to kick off officially session 2 of the Perfectly Imperfect 12-week program. And as you can see by the title of it, today we're going to start the self-acceptance journey, and we're going to look at it in a few different ways. So remember last week I said to you to suspend your current reality. And the way that we're going to do this is look at life from a few different ways. And the first one that we're going to take a look at is looking at balance through the chakras. Now, for some people, looking at the chakras might be a strange thing because it's not something that they believe in, or it's not something that they've encountered before. But we also want to look at it because it's a slightly different way of looking at things. Because a lot of times we spend more time focusing on the physical body than taking a look at the energetic and emotional body and what's going on inside of us. So instead of looking what's going on inside of me and taking place inside of me, I will put my focus on other people. I will put my focus on outside things. Because we're always, as humans, looking for tangible and definable results. So rather than look at something that's intangible or something that I can't really see or imagine or understand, I'll focus on the external and look for those tangible results and look for those definable results. Because when I am getting those tangible results and when I'm getting those definable results, then I feel happy. So like what we said last week, the sense of identity or my level of happiness is determined that I have by my level of success with my labels. So we want to take a look at this because from an energetic point of view, we're made up of layers of vibrating energy. And from a quantum physics point of view, we're all atoms that have come together to make up the solid being that I am here. But we're all within us have got these different vibrating energies, all that react and move at different speeds and with different purposes. So I've written down a note here, why look at the chakras? And I've answered the question myself, why not? Each one will represent a part of who we are, what we do, and how we work and show up. So to give you a kind of like brief definition, a chakra means wheel, and this refers to energy points in the body that is said to be spinning discs that go at different speeds. And in order to feel grounded and centered with my center of self, they all need to be in alignment. Now, when we say they all need to be in alignment, that doesn't mean that I have to be in perfect alignment all along. And we'll look at that a little bit later when we talk about echoes and things like that. But me as a human, I operate on all 4 levels. I have my physical body, which is what you see in front of you and what I show you. Then just within inside of that, I have my mental body. So that's my mental level of being. So that's how I think and the things that I say to myself and the things that I process in my head. Then just out of sight of me, I have my energetic being or my emotional being. And that's where all my emotions are processed. So in order for me to get in touch with a emotion, I have to go from my body into my head to tell me a story, and then it creates something in my emotional being, which I then rationalize in my head or tell myself a story about that emotion, and it affects me physically. And then outside of me, in the big scheme of things, is what we call, and I think I mentioned it last week, is my spiritual being. Now, all 4 of those things, like I say, need to be in alignment. But it's not about being in alignment all the time. It's about being aware of the alignment. If we look at a lot of Eastern philosophies, and chakras are based, are taken from philosophies in the Far East, we see a lot of the spiritual, I'm just going to use the word gurus, like especially when it comes to mind, we look at people like Buddha or images like Buddha, and they're all about being in touch with your sense of self and being aware of what is going on. And Buddhism is not about being happy all the time. It's about being happy with whatever is going on in your life. And when you're happy with whatever is going on in your life, then you can get in touch with your chakras more. And the reason that I've done this diagram is that it can just give us an indication of where there might be an imbalance. Now, we've got the diagram on the page there, and it is in black and white, but they generally, well, my copy is in black and white, but they generally are all different colors. But if I take a look at them, starting from the root chakra, the root chakra is where my sense of self comes from. And the words that go with my root chakra are I am. We can look at the side of, on the side where it says imbalance, and it says there, I am confident and full of energy, and I believe in myself. And whereas we look at it when it is out of balance, we can often find ourselves saying, I wish someone believed in me, and why can't I do anything right? So when the chakra is out of balance, we can find out by asking ourselves those kind of questions. It's like, do I feel confident right now? Do I feel full of energy? Do I believe in myself, or am I on the other side? Now, the questions that we ask right now, we might answer negatively to all of them. And that's perfectly all right, because we are working through this process. And like John said at the beginning, we might find it challenging. So our chakras are gonna, and remember I speak French sometimes, our chakras are gonna be, what the fuck is going on? I want this, I want that, da, da, da. There's all these parts of ourselves on all different levels that are being challenged and that are being questioned. If we go up to our sacral chakra, which is kind of like just above our pubic area, it says there, I'm in control of my destiny and I'm a fountain of ideas. And the statement that goes with that is I feel. So that's where all our feelings come from. And on the other side of it, when it's out of balance, it's like, what's the point of all this? Because there's too much going on. So a lot of times when that is out of balance, we can feel kind of like on the other side there, you'll see with each one of them, I've written down a few things like, that's where your creativity comes from, your sacral chakra. So sometimes I know that myself as a highly creative person, when my sacral chakra is out of balance, I really find it difficult to come up with ideas and solutions and all that sort of stuff. And I know now that when I am in that state of mind, or when my mind is thinking that way, that I need to do a little bit of work there. There are kind of like meditations that you can find on podcasts and on the YouTube. I'm not going to, on the YouTube. Do you know the YouTube? The YouTube. There are meditations and the like on YouTube that you can listen to balance your chakras. But I just want to run through it for the purpose of us looking at what might be out of balance. Now, I'm not going to run through all of them because they are all written down there for you to take a look at and ponder upon. But when you look at these questions, and when you look at especially the out of balance side, because we're going to look at things from a negative point of view, you'll have one in particular that really resonates with you, that when you look at it, you're going to say, yeah, I get that one. Because like I said, we might feel a little bit of all of them, but there's going to be one that is more out of alignment than the others. And when we start to focus and work on that one, it has a ripple effect up and down. So there's one that I constantly struggle with, and that's my throat chakra. And that's all about I talk. Now, as you all know, this is kind of like an inaugural program for me. And for a long, long time, I couldn't find my voice. I didn't know how to express myself. And I was constantly saying to myself, I wish I could say how I feel, or I'm afraid to express my point of view in case someone said something. So when I started to work on that chakra that was the most out of balance, or that energetic part of my being that was most out of balance, I found that it had an impact on the others. I found that once I started to find my voice and Perfectly Imperfect came together, I started to be more confident about what I wanted to say. And then I stepped out and started talking about it and saw that it was well received. And then you guys came on board, and it helped me to kind of like focus on that. I also know that before I start a session, sometimes my throat will feel a little bit closed because I get a little bit anxious. So I know, okay, let me just spend a little bit of time focusing on that. And remember, we're also talking about reprogramming how we feel and reprogramming what's going on in our body. So at first, it might feel a little bit difficult to get things back into balance. But once we start to do it more and more, it gets a lot easier. And that's the reason why I like to kind of like take a look at ourselves in different ways. When I start to understand that I also have an energetic body and that I am also an energetic being, I can start to work on myself a little bit more. So what I would encourage you to do in your journaling time is take a look at those chakras and ask yourself, well, which one for me has the most charge? Which one for me has the most feeling? Because then that also gives you something to focus on as we move forward. And a thing that is important to look at it when you start looking at the chakra that feels most imbalanced or feels most out of alignment is that they can become blocked by long held or negative states that we've held on to for a long time, or rigid thought patterns that we've held on for a long time. It can be limiting beliefs, consistent negative and harsh self-talk. So when we look at that chakra, we can start to ask ourselves, okay, well, what rigid thought patterns do I have around that? Or what is my consistent negative self-talk? Or what kind of limiting beliefs do I have when it comes to that? Again, I only have my own example to share. And when I talk about my throat chakra, and that's the one that I've done the most work on, there were some thought patterns that I'm not allowed to share my view, or I'm not qualified enough to tell people what I think, or what I've prepared is not good enough to share with people. So it's going to help us start uncovering stuff that we're going to look at later on in the program. So again, I'll just point, fuck, I lost my train of thought. That's it. We're gonna, encourage you to take a look at, some of the rigid beliefs that you might have in place around that, or some of the negative states that you've kept yourself in when it comes to that structure and the way that you consistently talk to yourself. Because the more we start writing, the more that we start uncovering. Remember, I said that for this 12 weeks, your journal is going to be your best friend. So treat it like you do your best friend and share everything in it. Right. The next thing that we're going to take a look at, and yeah, the diagram is all filled in there, but I want to explain it a little bit more. And that is the building diagram. So we have this diagram in our manuals. We have the one that's filled in, and we have the one that's left for you to write your own things in. Because like buildings, each one of us is unique in our own ways. And we may have similar thought patterns and we may have similar emotions, but the way I experience it is going to be different to the way that you experience it. And my limiting beliefs are going to be different to your limiting beliefs. And it's kind of like, if you look at this building, this is where I live. And it doesn't necessarily represent my house, but it represents the building that is my body. Every part of my body represents a different part of my health, or a different part of my life, not my health, sorry, because we're going to take a look at another metaphor later on in the program of the different rooms that make up our building. But we'll see there's a little person standing in the middle, and the house that we live in, with the walls that surround us and the ceiling that is over us, that's my comfort zone. That's where I stay and spend most of my time. It's where I feel most comfortable, whether I'm being positive towards myself or negative towards myself, because sometimes being harsh on ourselves becomes our comfort zone. We get used to it. We get used to saying these things over and over to ourselves. And even though they may not necessarily be nice, it's more comfortable for me to be harsh to myself than it is for me to be kind to myself. And like Nicola mentioned last week, I can show other people compassion, but I don't show myself compassion. That can become a comfort zone. And our house is built on a floor slab, and our floor slab is represented, as you can see there, by our emotions and by our feelings. Now, we want our emotions to be as level as possible, because if we have our house and the floor slab is all over the place like this, the house is not going to be very stable. And if you think about that floor slab, we covered it in a little bit last week, as my resilience zone. My floor slab is going to be as strong as my resilience zone. That means I can still have negative emotions, but it doesn't get me outside of that resilience zone. I don't get into a hyper state, or I don't get into a hypo state where my emotions are low or my emotions are too high. I'm able to manage my emotions and deal with them effectively. So my floor slab is that resilience that we were talking about, that ability to bounce back and be happy with whatever is going on around us. We then build some walls, so we can see, you know, with where we are, that there are walls around us. And we build those walls for two reasons. We build those walls to keep ourselves safe, and we build those walls to keep people out. Because sometimes we don't want people to get closer to us. And I'm sure that we've all heard it said, and we'll have experienced it in our own ways. I build walls up so that people don't get too close to me, or I build walls up so that people don't see what's going on inside of my house. And a lot of times I will decorate the outside walls rather than the inside walls. Because if the outside walls look good, and if the outside walls look maintained, people are going to think that the inside is okay as well. But because I'm stuck in my comfort zone, and because I'm kind of like where I am in my life, I don't let people in, or I don't let my guard down. And those are the two reasons why we build the walls around us. We then have a ceiling on top of us. Now, a lot of times people talk about, oh, I've hit a glass ceiling, or whatever it is. For me, I like to look at it differently, and I see it as a concrete ceiling, because that ceiling stops me from seeing what's outside of my building. It stops me, like it says there, from tapping into new opportunities, from exploring who I am, from looking at my kind of like personal desires and unspoken dreams. But it's outside of that house where freedom comes into play. But a lot of times I stay in my comfort zone. I use that ceiling because it's the easier thing for me to say, to stay inside there. And without breaking that ceiling, we can't see or define what is above it. Because like I said at the beginning, all buildings are different. Your building is going to be different to my building. And I am going to be the one that once I break through that ceiling can define what I see. And that's part of the process that we are going to be going through, is finding different ways to break that ceiling. It doesn't mean that we have to leave our house all the time, because I believe that a comfort zone is a good place. A comfort zone is where I can come to be with myself, to reflect on things, to learn, to grow. We need comfort in our lives. But by staying in that comfort zone, we don't go outside to learn the lessons. And you can see on the outside of the wall there, we kind of like have these, I couldn't find a picture of kind of like razor wire or that sort of stuff, but we put in place personal boundaries, or we don't have boundaries for ourselves. So people just come and go in our lives as we please. When we don't have boundaries for ourselves, that's often when we do a lot of people pleasing. But we also have boundaries imposed upon us by other people. So other people might say to us, oh, well, Gareth, you should be doing X, Y, Z, or Gareth, why don't you da, 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 or Gareth, wah, 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 wah. So my boundaries are not only put in place by myself, but sometimes without us being aware of it, they can be defined by other people. And those are kind of like the things that we show and the things that we transmit. By not being aware of my boundaries, I can often transmit the message to people that, excuse me, that it's okay for you to treat me like that. Because a lot of times when my boundaries are crossed, I don't communicate them. So I teach people how to treat me. I teach people whether they can come into my house or not, by the actions that I consistently do. But I also will show people what I think they want to see. And that was one of the things that I struggled with for a long time, is I thought that I should be a certain way because I thought that that's how people wanted to see me. So I was only transmitting what I thought that I should, rather than transmitting what I wanted to. And it was by me starting to define my own personal boundaries, but breaking through that concrete ceiling, that I was able to connect with who I was and define what I wanted to share. And it became easier for me to do that. Now we can take a look there at the foundations, and the foundations are kind of like what we stand on and what our house is built upon. It's almost like the surface level stuff that I admit to. So it's easy for me to say, I don't have any confidence, or I'm not good enough. But when we start to look, there is always something behind that. That's the surface level excuse that we use to keep us in our comfort zone. And like it says there, it's our common excuses. But also in my foundation is my self-image. It's how I see myself. When I look in the mirror, I don't just see my physical body. I also see all the things that I tell myself. So every time I look in the mirror, even though I might only have a brief glance of it, I'm not only seeing my physical image, but when I'm not on top of it, or when I'm not in my resilience zone, I see all the stories that I'm telling myself. And it kind of like becomes an anchor, and an anchor is something that keeps us, like we know, when a ship puts down its anchor, it keeps the ship in place. My physical image that I see in the mirror becomes an anchor for all the stories that I'm telling myself and all the things that I don't want people to see. It's our coping strategies. And like we said last week, the labels and the roles that we hide behind. But we also, in the foundation, put boundaries in place to stop us addressing the real issue. Because in the ground around us is the real issue that will be holding us back. It is the hard-hitting truths. And like I like to say to people is, how would you feel if someone found out your deepest, darkest secret? And when we start to tap into and answer that question, I'm starting to get to the root cause of how I'm defining myself now. And that's what we want to do. We want to go beyond the foundation to look at the ground around us to find out in our own individual ways what the real issues are that are holding me back. What is it that is so wrong with me that I can't be myself? Because those are, like I said, those are the things that are really keeping us trapped and that we are afraid to confront, that we are afraid to see. And we're going to take a look as we go through this session, how we can use different ways to start to look at them. But the question that I want you to journal on for the purpose of this exercise is, number one, you can fill in this diagram and write about the things like, what are your common excuses? What are the things, the surface level things that you start to admit to? But also to start to take a look at what could be outside my building. Because they say in the personal development world that life begins when you step outside of your comfort zone. And whilst I agree with the sentiment, and whilst I agree that it's important to step outside your comfort zone, I believe that life begins in your comfort zone, because that's where I go to nurture and take care of the seeds that I've collected outside of my comfort zone. My seeds to understanding who I am and my seeds to self-growth are outside of my comfort zone. They involve me thinking differently. They involve me doing things differently. But I need to go outside of my comfort zone to get those seeds. And then I need to come back to my comfort zone, which I'm going to redecorate through the course of the program, so that I can nurture those seeds, so that I can take care of them, so that I can help them to grow and get my own levels of knowledge. Because there is 3 stages of learning. The first stage is received knowledge. So received knowledge is what I am sharing with you now. You are taking on new information, right? The second state of it is critical insight. Critical insight is where I look at it and say, okay, well, how can I apply this? How does it apply to me? What understandings do I get from it? And that sort of stuff. And then we come to embodied knowledge. And that's when it becomes just a state of being. It becomes how you do things. So that's what happens when we're inside our comfort zone. I get my own insights. I get my own thinking. But if I'm so focused on being outside of my comfort zone, I'm going to be on guard all the time. I'm going to constantly be looking out for what's going on. I'm not going to give myself time and space and comfort to process those new learnings. So when we start to kind of like take on that concept, not only are we looking at changing our comfort zone, we're looking at redefining that comfort zone as I connect more with me. Does anyone have any questions on that so far?
You said receive knowledge and then before embodied knowledge?
Critical insight.
Critical insight.
Yeah. So that's when I kind of like diagnose it and look at it and say, how does this apply to me? How does this serve me? What can I learn from it?
What do you do if you don't like your comfort zone? If you don't want to be in your comfort zone?
That's the process that we're working through now. So the important thing is to journal about what you don't like in your comfort zone right now. Because a lot of times we may not feel comfortable, but we may not also be 100% aware of all the things that are inside my comfort zone. So that's why we also want to look at the foundation and the surface level things, but there's going to be that hard-hitting truth that makes our comfort zone so unlikable. So we want to kind of like identify that in our own ways. We already know what it is, but sometimes we don't even like to admit it to myself. Does that help, John? For now. For now.
For now. Can I just say about the chakras? That was quite interesting because the chakra I thought was probably out of balance. It's not the one I'm pulled to be honest. So I thought my heart chakra is the one that was really not working very well. But to be honest, it's the solar plexus one. And as I think about it, my stomach's churning now. So
yeah.
So it's quite interesting. That's my sign. That chakra maybe is a bit out of balance.
Yeah.
I was surprised it was that one. Very surprised.
Well, I'll share my insight on you for that. Is like a lot of times we think our heart chakra is out of balance, but the fact that you've pushed yourself to do this shows that it is more in balance than you think it is. Because if your heart chakra was really out of balance, you wouldn't have pushed yourself to do something like this. So that's an important thing to kind of acknowledge. But then, yeah, when you look at the other chakras, you know, if you look at the other side, it's like, well, I have no idea what to do. A lot of times when people say, well, just accept yourself, you say, oh, that's a nice concept, but how do I do it?
Yeah, exactly.
And that's where you are right now. Like last week, we spoke about the nervousness. You know, this week, it's like, oh, my stomach is churning. So that's a very good indication that you are in touch with what's going on in your body. So when you want to do the other things, when you do the writing, you will find that you are reaching your personal truths when your stomach gets more uncomfortable. It's like, oh, no, I don't want to let that out. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. And that's the bit I don't like.
But remember also what we said last week about the blue sky thinking. Our thoughts are going to come and go, that you're not your thoughts and you're not this, what is going on. These emotions are there to say that you're onto something. I
think it's not so much the thoughts that bother me, because I'm so used to those, but it's the emotions.
Yeah.
I'm uncomfortable with, to be honest.
Yeah.
I'm very difficult to do.
We'll cover that in a little bit of detail in a bit. Nicola and Tash, you both okay?
Okay, in the fact that I understand. Yeah, I'm starting to bring up some more.
Right.
Working my comfort zone already. I've got a mental list.
Yeah. Well, I just, like I said, I just encourage you to journal as much as possible. And then if there are things that you don't want to talk about, just send me a message and we can also go into them in detail there. So we're going to start to look at now our sense of identity. And I'm briefly going to kind of like run through the diagram, this one. And we want to look at the going up cycle because we are working on knowing ourselves. And the three elements that are defined, that are required for that we need courage. We need courage to confront these things. We need courage to take a look at them. We also need to trust. We need to trust that even though our body has these emotions right now, it's communicating something that needs to be dealt with. Because if I didn't have something that needed to be dealt with, my body wouldn't be communicating with it. And for each of us in our own individual ways, we need to have a faith of some sort, something that we draw strength from, something that is outside of us. Like for the three of you that are together, you have the group as a collective whole where you can share your insights and learnings. Like the same for Jerome and I, we have each other that we can speak to. So that gives me the faith that I need to draw on the courage and trust the process. But when we choose to not go on that journey and start to get in the way of ourselves, we go the other way. You know, we have fears. It's like, oh, I'm having these emotions, I'm afraid of them, and then I will put a self-sabotage process in place where I will say, well, this doesn't apply to me, or I'm not going to do what is required, because then I can be in control again. And the sabotage can be as simple as repressing the emotion or pushing it aside and say, I'm not going to go there. Because when I don't have the emotion, then I'm in control. So we want to work on the upward rather than the downward. We want to focus on the courage that we have. Like I said, we've chosen to be here. That shows an immense amount of courage. We want to trust that our body is communicating things with us that need to be communicated, and draw upon a faith of some sort, whatever it is to you. For me, I choose to call it God for the simple reason that God stands for good, orderly direction. And it's easy for me during my times of need to just say, oh God, please help me, rather than have some long faluted name. I have my own definition of what God means to me. Doesn't mean that it's defined by a religious way or whatever, but that's where I draw the majority of my faith from. I go out in nature, or I take myself off to my own favorite places or whatever it is. And that gives me the faith to have the courage to trust the process. But we have these three levels of ourselves, and we are on the other diagram now. And we have in the middle there our authentic self. And then what happens is something comes along that makes us question who we are and causes us to say something must be wrong with me. And I'm going to show you a diagram now in a little bit that we call an echo, which will explain that in a little bit more detail. And often when something happens, I have those emotions, things like doubt or shame or anger or loneliness. Something has come along that has interrupted with my true sense of identity and made me feel a certain way, or made me say inside my comfort zone or deep down in my foundation that something is wrong with me. But then, in order for people to not see that something is wrong with me, I put on these masks. And these are the masks that I wear, or the things that I will say and do to stop people seeing the person that I'm afraid I am. Because whatever has made me detour or get off track with who I am makes me afraid. It's like, well, I don't want people to see that. I don't want people to see the real me, because once upon a time I got in trouble with it. And like I say, we will do whatever we have to do to protect our true self and keep it safe, even if it means being someone that we are not. So for a very, very long time, I shared last week that I have some mental health challenges. For a very, very long time, number one, I refused to take medication because I thought that if I was taking medication, I was being a failure. And number two, I was afraid that if anybody found out what was wrong with me, they wouldn't take me seriously because it still got out of hand every now and then, and I couldn't control it. So I almost became defined by my mental health disorders. It's like, my name is Gareth and I have XYZ, so that I would tell you first, just in case you found out, because once upon a time, someone told me that I'm going to be sick for the rest of my life. Whereas now I'm comfortable with it and I don't care if people know or don't. It's just a small part of me that makes me who I am. But I don't have to pretend that I have it under control. And I don't have to pretend that I've got it all together. And when I accept that that is part of the authentic me, I almost don't have to try. I almost don't have to pretend. I can just be me, but I do my best to not let it get the better of me. So we can say there, what happened that made you lose sight of who you are? I'm going to share my screen. I'm mindful of time. Come on, Gareth. Can you see a diagram there?
Yeah. Yes.
So I'm going to start. If you imagine that we have a timeline in front of us and one day we're plodding along and something happens that makes me feel a certain way, it creates a bubble on our timeline, and that bubble is called an echo, which is my emotionally charged historic occurrence. And if I don't deal with that, like I said earlier on, if I don't deal with that on all four levels, physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, there's going to be a part of me that stays trapped in that bubble, trying to make it right, or trying to protect me from that happening again. And like I said there, it affects us on all four levels. So you can say to yourself, okay, maybe there's something that I feel trapped in right now. Like John said, I don't like my comfort zone. You can start to say to yourself, well, when did that start happening? You know, when did I start to realize that I didn't like my comfort zone? Or what is happening that's keeping me trapped? And we can see that it affects us on all four of those levels: physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. You know, and how has it affected me physically? What physically happens when I recall this? I'll use John as an example because he shared it so beautifully. He feels this emotion and it's in his stomach. That's how it affects him physically. But then that will kind of like affect us mentally, because I don't do things as a result of how I feel. Or it'll affect me emotionally. What do I do in order to avoid feeling that way? And it ripples around. And we can experience trauma. Just, you know, trauma doesn't have to be big trauma. Your trauma is different to my trauma, is different to everyone else's trauma. But it's going to be an emotionally charged event that creates some sort of bubble. So I'm going to upload that into the group afterwards, and Tash can print it out so that you can have a copy and look at it in a little bit more detail. But that's often what happens when, oh no, you can't see me sharing. I'm going to stop sharing.
We can see you as well.
Okay. That's often what happens when I start to forget my authentic me. Something comes along and creates an echo that makes me feel a certain way, and then that makes me put on a mask or a label to protect that from happening. So an exercise that you can do, and an exercise that I did that really, really helped me, is once I start to look at these things that are below the surface and the negative self-talk, I kind of like draw a line in front of me, and I break it down into 5-year chunks. And I look at those 5-year chunks and I say to myself, well, are there any echoes in that chunk that is contributing to me feeling this way. And I take it 5 years at a time. So I don't have to remember everyone. I just need to remember what comes up for me. Because then later on, we will start looking at those in more detail and how we can change them, because those things are going to create our labels that we have that we want to let go on and so forth. So I'm going to stop sharing.
So Gareth, can I ask a question, please?
Yes.
So, like the pain in my legs and my hips is actually an echo.
Can be, yes.
That's not challenging at all.
It might also not be, it might also not be the first time you've had pain in your legs and your hips. There might be other times in the past that because you no longer, you know, because you got through it or you got over it, you don't really remember it.
In this lifetime?
Can be, yeah. It may not be the pain that you have now, but you may have had troubles before.
Okay.
And also the thing with echoes is that the further away we get from the original event without dealing with it, the more everything starts to look like it. So remember, there's a part of us in that bubble that's trying to protect us. And if we haven't dealt with it on all 4 of those levels, the further away we get, the more things happen, you know, so we can look at it, you know, and I'm sure we've all said it like, well, why does this keep happening to me? This keeps happening to me because something or a part of me is trying to protect me from that original situation.
So why is this still happening to me can also be, why am I still doing this? Or why
Yes.
do I keep doing this over and over again?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Anything that almost is that kind of like, why me? Like, why do I keep, why does this, why, whatever it is. So we'll each have our own individual ways of that. You know, for me, one of my big ones was, why does this keep happening? Why does this keep happening? Why do I keep being hurt? Why do I keep being hurt? Why do I keep being hurt? Because there was a part of me that was stuck in the bubble that was still being hurt that I hadn't dealt with.
Even though you thought you dealt with it.
Yeah. Or I thought I'd dealt with it, very rightly so. So I'm going to now look at the iceberg, and I'm not going to go into it in all that detail because there's a lot of it written, there's a lot of it there that is drawn in on the diagram. But we often hear that we are like an iceberg. We're like 25% above the surface, 75% below the surface. And it's what's below the surface that truly drives us and who we are afraid that we are. But a lot of times we spend so much time decorating the top so that people can see what we show them. So when we kind of like start looking at those, we can see that all of them affect us. All of those things are common things that we have. But you're going to have 4 or 5 major ones. There are going to be 4 or 5 pretty significant ones that apply to you. And I would advise you to kind of like look at those and circle those ones and keep them in mind. So for me, the ones that I kind of like circled was trauma that I've been through, abuse that I've been through, broken families and relationships, family experiences, and unrealistic expectations. Those were my 5 major ones, where a lot of my kind of like whys came from, and a lot of the stuff that kept me inside my comfort zone came from. Yes, I have deep-seated fears. Yes, I have guilt and shame. Yes, I've failed in life. Yes, I beat myself up when I make mistakes. But those 5 for me were the ones that created the most tension. So for me, like I say, because my heart chakra was, because my throat chakra was the most blocked, when I think about talking about those things, this is in the past, when I thought about talking about those things, my whole throat closed up. Or kind of like some people, if their, you know, if their crown chakra or other chakra is blocked, when they look at those things, they'll get a little bit overwhelmed. If their heart chakra is blocked, they'll just feel this sense of emptiness. If their root chakra is blocked, like it says there, it's like, well, what's the point? I can't deal with this, so what's the point? But there's a few important things that I want to kind of like stress, and I want us to acknowledge that will help us to deal with this stuff. And I think I touched upon it a little bit last week, but everything that we do, all these thoughts that we have, all these kind of like processes, the way that we talk to ourselves, the actions that we take have been taught to us. We are literally photocopiers, because that's the only way we learn. We learn by copying, and we learn from our experiences. So when we start to realize that everything that we do and everything that we think has been taught to us by life, by people that we surround ourselves with, it gives me a sense of encouragement that I can learn something new, that I can start to say, okay, well, on some level, I've been taught this. So that doesn't mean that it really is who I am. But because it might have been so ingrained by ourselves, by other people, by whatever, we let it define who we are. And every single thing, good and bad, like I said, every single thing, good and bad, defines and shapes who I am. So when I start to look at it like that, because we're operating from that place of detachment, it's a lot easier to manage our emotions. Another thing, when we kind of like look at an iceberg, we know that every iceberg is unique in shape and size and how it looks. And that's the same with each of us. We all are unique in our own individual ways. But the iceberg doesn't direct itself or doesn't move itself. Everything outside of it has an influence on how the iceberg moves. But the iceberg stays still and grounded and is not kind of like affected too much by what goes on around us. But when we are focusing only on the top, we see how choppy the waves are. We see how bad the weather is. We see how good the weather is, or whatever it is. And that determines how we show the top of our iceberg. But when we start to accept that the iceberg is just going with the flow of life and not trying to force things, that's when it becomes easier to be me. Because I'm grounded in who I am. I know what's going on beneath the surface, and I'm not always affected by the weather. Another thing that we need to realize, and this is, I think that is pretty important, is that the iceberg is just a small part of the greater whole. And we all have, and it's something that is called common humanity. And common humanity is about focusing on the things that all human beings share. We all have one goal in life, and that's to be happy and comfortable with who we are. But a lot of times we look outside of ourselves and are seeking our happiness from that. But when I embrace the philosophy of common humanity, I'm able to kind of like look at people for who they are, and rather than judge them, take a look at myself and say to myself, well, just like me, they want to be happy. Just like me, they want to connect with themselves and know who they are. And when I focus on that, it's so much easier to work on me. It's so much easier to go within because I'm not being distracted by looking at everything else that's going on around me. We're all in this together, and we just want to be happy. And the other side of it is we look at independence, interdependence. And interdependence is where we're all part of an ecosystem and learning and growing from each other. And it's my individuality that is going to contribute to my community. It's my individuality that's going to have an impact on the people around me. But the impact that I have on the people around me is going to have an impact on the people that they have around them. And you know, one thing that is really hits home the reality of independence and how my actions and who I am has a ripple effect is if I take a look at this pencil and say to myself, well, how many people were actually involved in getting this pencil into my hands? A lot of times we think, oh, well, I went to the shop and then I just bought it and then it got into my hands. But we forget about the people that knocked the trees down to make the wood. We forget about the people that maybe looked after the trees. We forget about the people that built the factory that was used to make the pencils. We forget about the people that was used to build the machines and all that sort of stuff. So even this might just be a simple pencil. It depends on so many different processes, and so many different processes have an impact on it. And that's the same with me. When I appreciate and accept the philosophy of independence, it makes me want to connect more with who I am, because then it has a ripple effect outwards. And that's where I want to end off today on, to the official ending. Thank you for joining me for session 2, and I look forward to seeing you in session 3. Now, that's for the recording. I'll cut it there. Does anybody have any questions? I know that was quite a lot of content to take in, but the main point that I wanted to get across is that we can start to look at our bodies and our lives in different ways. So that's why I chose to do it kind of like through the chakras from an energetic point of view, through the building that I live in, and through the iceberg, to help me see that kind of like I'm part of the greater whole. And the more in touch I am with my iceberg, the more I can have an impact on the others around me.